This is Sound Medicine. I'm Barbara Lewis. To continue our conversation about the challenges of taking care of aging parents, Dr. Ora Peskovitz and I are joined in the studio by Hayden Buchanan. His new book, titled Taking Care of Mother, Taking Care of Me, is a memoir of his experience caring for his mother when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Welcome to Sound Medicine.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I was curious as to how you found the energy and why you felt you needed to write a book about the experience after caring for your mother with Alzheimer's.
I had a need to share the experience. I didn't look forward to going back and reliving it, which I had to do, certain portions of it. But I felt that it was very important to share it with other caregivers, present and potential caregivers, as well as former caregivers who needed some resolution, who hadn't worked it out of their system yet.
Could you tell us briefly about your mother's life and her course with Alzheimer's?
Well, matter of fact, in the book, I make a point of telling a lot about her life from the beginning because people tend to associate Alzheimer's just with a person in a chair at the end of their life. So she lived a very, I guess, traditional life. She raised 5 children and a demanding husband and did a lot of community service. Did 10 years of volunteer over here at the Red Cross, teaching the blind how to sew and do macrame. And so she lived her life in service to others. The diagnosis wasn't made until 8 months after my return. When I first returned, she was leading a normal life.
Driving?
She was driving. She was part of social organizations, still doing volunteer work, still going to church. People would not notice. I've noticed with a lot of dementia patients, and from other caregivers I've spoken with, that when people start to get dementia, they work to hide it. I mean, they compensate in ways that you wouldn't believe. I'm sure it's a survival instinct. And I was able to tell certain things because I'd find notes written where she'd be trying to write out a word and decide whether this was the right word or that, and I knew she was having trouble. But her doctor was a geriatrician, and he didn't make mention of any serious problem at that time. She didn't take any medications at all. She was very healthy. And so I just had to decipher what was a result of mourning and what was the dementia.
Did you ever contemplate moving her to be closer near you rather than you uprooting your life?
No, I didn't because especially with Alzheimer's people, their home is their foundation. And when you take them away from it, they get pretty disoriented. And I don't think she'd have considered it.
So you became her primary caregiver, but it's my understanding you have no medical background or experience. How did you do that?
No, I didn't. It was just a commitment to her to start with, and I didn't see a need for really medical background to start. It was a chance to repay someone who had done so much for me and someone who had done so much for other people. It just made me feel very good inside. I mean, as I say, she was leading a normal life. I just dove in, and what I did was I wanted to establish as healthy a lifestyle as possible for her and try and slow the progression of dementia. So I started a garden growing organic vegetables. I'd cook for her, raise her nutrition level a little because she was already pretty good. Start some exercise. After supper, we'd take a good walk. And to maintain my own health, I started my own exercise program. I got very involved in step aerobics and some weights and things to help me. It turned out to be the most helpful therapy throughout caregiving.
The exercise.
The exercise. Yeah. It was.
When you look back, I'd love to get some examples from you, some stories, if you will, as maybe kind of the highlights and the lowlights of this journey with your mother.
You know, when you consider the Alzheimer's journey, a lot of people think, they just think of the horror. But there are a lot of components to the Alzheimer's journey. One is the caregiver and care recipient. Another is the support staff, whether or not your family is going to help, medical staff. And so these are all things that can be difficult or can be helpful. My care recipient, mother, was a pleasure to be around. and her personality never changed. She never got to the point where she was striking out at people or using profanity or anything. It was just a gentle soul that she'd always been. We had some wonderful times together. Our personalities blended very well, so she trusted me completely, and I kept her at ease. I remember, for example, a fall afternoon when we were sitting on the back porch, and the dementia was increasing, but we were just sitting out there enjoying the fall afternoon, and the beautiful leaves were starting to fall, and so I thought I'd pull a trick on her, and I mimicked a bird, like a cardinal sound, and she'd look in the trees and say, "Where's that bird?" So and then she saw me smiling, and she said, "Oh, you did that." Then I turned around, and she tried to do a bird whistle, and it sounded more like wind going through a window pane or something. And, and I turned and looked at her, and she said, "I can do that too." And then she said to me, "We're having fun, aren't we?" And I said, "Yes, Mother, we're having fun." Mm-hmm. And it was that way. We continued on that way. It was there was never any unease around each other.
There's always that time, and for a lot of people that have loved ones with Alzheimer's, where they no longer recognize you. They don't know that you're the son anymore. Did you get to that point? Did she get to that point?
Oh, absolutely. There are 2 points that really stand out with me on this. In later years, when she was in the nursing home and I was there, people, when they ask about her, one thing people always ask you is, "Does your mother know you?" And at that point I said, "Our smiles know each other." And they did. They really identified with each other. But earlier on, it's a terrible thought. The first time that your mother doesn't recognize you, know who you are. If you sit and contemplate it, it's shocking. But when it actually happened, in my case, something far more serious was happening, so that seemed really more minor. One of the worst challenges I had was that I had to endure a 12-hour experience with the catastrophic effect, which is when the Alzheimer's patient, it's the worst experience they can have. It's like a psychotic breakdown. And we were on a return trip from Florida. And she and I were alone in the car. And this gentle soul, who loved me more than anything, I loved her more than anything, suddenly she was disoriented. And she didn't know where she was. And then it became she didn't know who I was. But it became much worse. She began to think I could be somebody who would harm her. And then she wanted to get out of the car on the interstate, and she wanted me to pull over, and she wanted out, and she wanted to go back. She said she'd left something in Florida, and I assured her that she hadn't, but she was on her way at that point, and it was a brutal experience. It was singular to last as long as it did. But we made it. We finally made it back, but only because we were both in excellent basically physical health. Otherwise, the stress it could have been, a heart attack or a stroke from it. I wrote a whole chapter about it in the book. It's something that I want to help other people avoid, other caregivers. They have to be cautious with any time they leave their home, even going across town, going to visit the doctor. They have to be very cautious because your loved ones can get disoriented very quickly, and when they do, the bottom falls out of their world.
You're listening to Sound Medicine. I'm Barbara Lewis, along with my co-host, Dr. Ora Pescovitz. Our guest is Hayden Buchanan. We're talking about his book, Taking Care of Mother, Taking Care of Me, and that book is the story of his time spent caring for his mother with Alzheimer's disease. Male caregivers. It usually ends up being the daughter that comes home, not the son. But it seemed like both your parents had singled you out and had asked you for years to come home. But I was wondering if in the course of since your mother's death, if people have said, this is really kind of unique.
Yeah, they have, as a matter of fact, and it is unique, frankly, because they have several daughters, and so that was another thing that was difficult. And one of the big surprises is the the amount of family problems and disagreements at this time. And I started to read a lot about it, and I was surprised to see how widespread this is. Handling Alzheimer's care is very difficult, and emotions that come to the surface are complicated. And when you multiply emotions by the number of people involved, it raises exponentially these potential problems. But yes, as a male, and not only as a male, but as someone who lived in another place and moved back to do it when, other people are here. So it was irregular, and people would ask me about that. But I think that was a good point you made about my parents, or my father anyway, singling me out. He felt that, I was single and without dependents, and so that made my choice a little easier, I suppose, and easier for him to ask me. We live in a society where women have been the caregivers, nurses, and such, and so to change that, when suddenly you get into gender issues of a son taking care of his mother, and changing briefs and stuff, it wasn't a problem. It became a non-problem, and I remember the first time. I was a little shook up by it afterwards. It was in the middle of the night, and I don't think she knew exactly who I was. But after I'd done it, I started going back to my room, and I heard her from behind. She said, "Thank you, thank you." Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just realized then that, you do what it takes. You love somebody, you do what it takes. You don't think about things like that.
You've touched a bit on the family dynamics. I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of the details of your interactions with your sisters.
Well, family is another thing. I wrote a whole chapter on that one, too. It's a surprise when you spend over 40 years with people and you never even have a single argument. I mean, you get along, you're close. And suddenly serious things happen like this. What I think the important thing to realize here is that it's not just your siblings that you're dealing with. It's their spouses. It's their children. It becomes so all-encompassing that it's very difficult. A few months after Mother passed away, a physician asked me, he said, "Hey, with all the years and experience of caregiving that you've had, what one thing would you do most differently now if you were starting over?" And I said, well, once I had a diagnosis and I knew what my mother or the loved one wanted, I would call the family together and I would say, here's the situation, who's willing to do what? And I would not allow any negative emotions in there. I mean, this is not about blame or anything. It's a question of what are you willing to do to help out? And if you don't want to, that's fine. You don't say anything to people about it. But the caregiver has to know what the assets are and what the negatives are too. And so it's not a time for blame. And if people don't want to help, then so be it. I know in my case, for example, one of my sisters was very honest right out about not helping, and I appreciated it. I was a little disappointed, but I appreciated the honesty because that's what's important here. It's not about coming into bad feelings about somebody not helping you. Concerning the family issue, and let's say the issue of not receiving help. The other caregivers I've spoken with who tend to be a little unresolved or embittered afterwards if they didn't get help, I try to tell them, set that aside, that accept that this was your destiny. You were supposed to do this. And so that's my mission, really, is to share that experience, try and make people realize the incredible journey they've been through, and that if they hadn't ended up doing it alone, they wouldn't have received the benefit. In my case, I know that I did.
Well, Ora and I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Hayden Buchanan.
I enjoyed very much being here with you and a chance to talk about it. So thanks much for having me.
Hayden Buchanan is the author of Taking Care of Mother, Taking Care of Me, published by Clarier Press. We've put some of his tips for providing home care for Alzheimer's patients on our website. You can find those by going to soundmedicine.iu.edu.